Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Blame It on Marketing with Emma and Ruta. And today's episode, we are going to be talking about why marketing isn't just vibes with the awesome Jane. So, before we get into the topic and what we mean by that, Jane, over to you. Please tell us about yourself.
My name is Jane Stecyk, and I am the SVP of Marketing at a company called Mighty Networks, which is a community platform that brings people together in memberships, courses, events, and creates people magic. And I am delighted to talk today about why marketing is not just vibes, something I strongly believe in.
So, Jane, why is it so difficult sometimes for marketers to articulate why an idea is really good?
I love this question because I actually reject the premise because I think sometimes people choose marketing as a career or like tumble into it, as I think so many of us have done, myself included. And we think, oh, it's a fun job, it's about aesthetics, but really, it's not about what's just good to you. I think all of our ideas, we don't actually know if they're going to be good or not. We have a hypothesis that something is could be great and make a difference. But I think when people just enter the fray thinking I'm creative, I have great ideas, my ideas are good, they're almost set up to fail because they don't know how to actually make the case for why that idea might be good.
Definitely. I think that goes beyond marketers as well, right? I'm not suggesting that we've learnt bad habits from other people, but I think especially like when we're early on in our careers, we sometimes end up working for, senior leaders who do things because they think something's good. And then we kind of maybe sometimes pick up the habit from them. I don't know if what you guys think about that.
I always get surprised when people have really, really strong opinions about things that I can't quite understand how they could have such a strong opinion about, like about something that's quite subjective. And they're like, no, this is shit or this is good. And like, this is how you should fix it. And I'm like, but how do you know? Like, I know that experience and all of those things and whatever, but sometimes you're just like, no, this is just your preference.
Yeah, and I think like if we can be more honest about, look, I this is my preference, I think it's cool, but then have kind of our reasons why. Like, I see other brands that are doing something like this, it's working for them, or this is how we can be different from everyone else in the space and stand out. I think if you just have one or two reasons, and what I find, marketing or not, sometimes the most creative people are the worst at pitching their ideas because they live in this world of like, can't you see the possibilities? And they're like pulling these threads together. And people on the outside are like, I can't. Like, please explain it to me. And it can be a huge challenge sometimes.
Yeah, especially if you're operating in a, I think if you are sometimes not just in house, actually, I think sometimes agencies fall into this trap quite often because they are kind of operating in a vacuum to some extent. Like if you've got a really good agency that's full of, great creative marketers, that's kind of they're all you're listening to, right? You're just listening to each other and what you think is good. And again, like you say, that is sometimes purely subjective. It's not necessarily driven by data or driven by experimentation, which is what we kind of want to see to back up why something is good. So we've all heard this, right? Because we've all been on the receiving end of conversations with other marketers or whoever it might be that comes in and says, hey, I think this thing is really good, or this thing is a vibe, or it's a really fun thing that we should try out. But what happens to us as marketers, and why do you think we should try and avoid saying things like that, in particular to external stakeholders?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this show Succession. I don't know if you all have seen it, but and I promise this is relevant. There's a point where the father, who's like this like businessman, talks to his kids and he's like, I love you, but you're not serious people. And my fear and what I've seen happen and what I've honestly been guilty of myself is when you're asking somebody, okay, why should we do this? Or what's your hypothesis? Or what's the impact this is going to have? And they're like, it's cool. It's vibes. As much as you want to like take it on faith and be like, okay, like you're a creative person, it feels unserious. And I think it makes it harder for the next thing you want to pitch, the next thing you want to do. If you're thinking about, not just one and done, but building a relationship with an external partner, or someone you're consulting for, or an executive, you got to make a great impression and kind of know your stuff and not just throw out vibes.
I think even if you do get away with that and somebody does sign off on your work based on that kind of a pitch, the thing you're going to be getting yourself into is that because you're not thinking about how this will impact the business, it means you're not thinking about the measurements around it. So then when you go back to that person, you can't really articulate what that thing did anyway, even if it was really great and it was really impactful. You're just not priming yourself for that conversation. So I think it can get in the way there as well. I don't know if that you've had that experience, Jane, as well.
Yeah. And I've had that experience too, and it's stressful, even if you're like, oh, I think this was successful, but you didn't go into it saying, this is what we're going to measure, this is what we're going to learn. Because the fact is too, if you go into it with some idea of what you're going to measure, even if it doesn't work, that's a less stressful conversation, because you're like, hey, we thought it was going to do this and it didn't. That's interesting. What could we do from here? Versus just, I told you it was going to be cool, nothing happened. And now we have to have an awkward conversation about like, what did cool mean when you said that?
Also, you can put something out there that is cool and edgy and funny, and everyone pats themselves on the back and goes, yeah, that was fun. What did it get you? You see that so often, right? And Ruta and I work with a lot of B2B companies, so especially in B2B, fun and cool isn't necessarily top priority, unfortunately, as much as we'd love it to be sometimes. But yeah, like you can put stuff out there, and it's a bit like, well, if every pound counts, and we're doing stuff for the sake, we're kind of doing stuff for the sake of it, which is also, that's what this kind of boils down to, I think, in my head, is that like, if you say something's a vibe or cool or fun, you're just kind of doing something for the sake of it. And you're kind of like doing the spray and pray marketing and hoping that you get something back out of it, which quite frankly, I think most of us, I think what we're getting at is that's not good enough anymore.
Yeah. And to me, this is all about just how we communicate our ideas. And if you kind of have to prime the pump, like, hey, I have this crazy vibey idea I want to do, but also I have a calendar or plan for like 5 essential things we need to do that are going to move the business. And like, give me this one flyer where I just want to try something kind of wackadoo. I think if you come in with a plan where the vibey cool thing you want to do is part of an overall strategy, and you have a track record of being thoughtful and considered and thinking about the revenue, you're going to get more opportunity to do the cool, fun things because you build trust and credibility versus just coming out of the gate like, marketing is vibes. Trust me. I use Canva.
I found a template.
Yeah, I got a template. It's hot.
Or writing something that's really in your face, and then everyone going, oh yeah, that's missed the mark. Because we've all seen some of that.
It's a little bit of an aside, but I had a interview. I was interviewing somebody once for a social media position, and we have like a paid project, and one of their first questions, you're like, oh, you ask questions and you think they're going to ask about the strategy, or they're going to ask about the revenue goals. That's the stuff you want to hear. And their question was, can we swear? And I was like, okay. I mean, what profanity is required for this strategy you're going to unveil? Needless to say, not the choice that we hired, but I thought that was a really interesting first question. Can we swear on your company's social media?
I mean, it's like, that's the kind of question that maybe you ask once you get the job.
I don't think it's a crucial interview question, right?
Yeah. It would make me nervous about handing over the keys to the company's social media if that's the first question you're leading with.
Yeah. And what do you think happens to the relationships with senior stakeholders when marketing do talk like this? Because we've all fallen into this trap. I have definitely been the person that's, I've had conversations with CEOs before and said things like, how tongue-in-cheek can we be on social? Like, that's a good example of, like, obviously I'm not asking if I can swear, just to be clear, but just like how far can we push some of these things? And if we don't articulate why we want to push them in particular, like, what happens to our relationships with those people?
Yeah. And I think, one thing I've really reflected on since everyone's gone remote, and I work fully remote, but also have at a time been in offices and have that experience. And I feel like at a fully remote company, there's no such thing anymore as a personality hire, right? Like, so it's not about coming in and showing like how fun and awesome you are to be around. You don't have to leave those parts of yourself at the door. But when it comes to building relationships with senior stakeholders, with executives, to me, I think you can only benefit from kind of being in interview mode, at least until you build up a lot of trust and credibility. But just saying, I got the job, I'm going to head into a meeting with the CEO and just be like super casual, like not super prepared, not showing my work. I just feel like it shoots you in the foot for building credibility and getting more control and power and opportunity down the line.
We talk about this quite a bit, and don't we, like about as a marketer knowing the audience you're internally marketing yourself to, and maybe that's appropriate with some of your colleagues, and that's completely fine, but until you get the vibe of the CEO and all your senior stakeholders, I think it's always easier to just be on the more professional side. Like, you're not risking anything at that point, unless your CEO wants you to be super quirky, but I feel like you'd figure that out quite quickly probably if you did end up in a meeting like that.
And that sounds weird. Like, if a CEO's like, be weirder, be quirkier, you're marketing, I'd be like, I don't know about this.
I'm not that kind of marketing.
It's like, but it's also like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes that does happen because, quite often, especially in startups, it's the founder's baby, right? And they're the ones who in the beginning, in the outset, kind of control the message that goes out into the world, don't they? And they quite often have a little dabble in trying to do some marketing themselves to start themselves off, which is completely understandable. And then I do think sometimes they are the one that says, oh, I don't like the tone of voice, or I don't like the way that's written, or those sorts of things. And they're kind of like, that's very difficult for us to counter as marketing. We've also talked about this a lot, which is that they are also coming at it from a point of view of like, oh, I think something is just basically fun or cool or a vibe, and I want you to try it out. And we're a bit like, no, the data says something else. And that's quite difficult to manage as well on the flip side.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to me, it's like you can only work with the situation and the culture you have. But if you feel good about, I presented my case, I have the data. And yeah, if it's the CEO, there comes a point when you kind of have to disagree and commit. But if you've built up trust and credibility, you can say that, like, look, I think there's a different way to go here. I'm super down to try this approach, measure it, and let's come back and have a conversation about how it did. And maybe I'll be super pleasantly surprised. And you might be. Like, that's the thing about marketing too. Like, you don't actually know, even if all the data suggests something. I know I've had the experience of like being so sure an A/B test was going to come out with like the thing I had planned and I had the visions, and it totally flopped, right? So just being prepared to say, here's why I think it won't work. I'm down to try it. Let's look at the data and learn from it. You can only push so far, and you can't take it that personally, I feel.
No, you can't. But you've got to be prepared to try. You've got to be prepared to run those experiments, right? Again, something we talk about all the time, which is that you've got to have the ability to frame it in that way. And I think maybe that's what a lot of marketers miss, is to frame it. It is a science experiment we're running. We want to run something. There's a hypothesis. There's an output. There's a timeline attached to it. There's a cost involved. All of those sorts of things. And if you can convey that in that way, like you say, Jane, you will get people's buy-in, because people will go, oh, well, actually they do these experiments, but the reason they do them is so that we can work out, they know what actually works, which again is so often what we struggle with in marketing, isn't it?
And not selling yourself as somebody that knows all the answers, which can be hard. And I think when the more senior you get, excuse me, the more senior you get, the more there is this expectation that you will come in and just know all the answers and do all the right stuff. And it's like, no, like I could have even worked in a similar company to yours, but it really doesn't mean that I know exactly what I need to do to make you lots of money right now. I'm going to have to try some stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the best things people can do too at a new role, or just in general, is instead of focusing on like, how do I present my ideas? It's like, how do I ask awesome questions and learn fast? Like, what's the question no one's asking that I can be the voice of, and that'll lead us down a different path? To me, that's at least as much of my time is asking questions versus coming up, with creative ideas, because the questions usually get me to a better idea. Even if we don't know the answer, it's like, oh, we should figure that out. What can we do to learn that?
What are some of your favorite questions to ask, if you have any?
Wow, that's
off the top of
that's
your
a
head?
great question. I'm always interested in why something doesn't work, especially if you look out and you see, okay, all our competitors are doing this. We've tried this and it did nothing for us. Like really dissecting, like, do we have a different audience? Do we have a different, channel strategy? Is our product so different? Is our onboarding so different? But like, why are these things that seem like they're working for other people not working for us? I think that's a really interesting question, because so often we look out at the competition and we're just like, they're doing that, let's do that. And I think it kind of helps you slow down and be like, maybe we should do something different because we actually have these differences. I think that's really interesting. And then what do I want somebody to feel or to leave this experience or piece of marketing thinking? That really is helpful to kind of get in the mindset of our customers. So if we're sending an email, like after they read this email, what's the one thing we want them to take away? What's the one thing we want them to think? I think that's a really helpful framing, especially if you're having one of those days where you're just staring at a blank page and you're like, I don't know what to put here. Thinking about what you want to create for a customer or a prospect can be really helpful and unlock sometimes.
Definitely. One of my favorite things, and it's really funny because one of the first times I heard it was from one of mine and Ruta's ex-colleagues, who we were working on a piece of content. She just went to, there was this big we got into this big, almost like poetic conversation about a piece of content, and it kind of completely lost its way. And she just was like, what is the purpose of this thing? Like, what is at the root of this piece of content? What is it trying to actually achieve? And I feel like so often we lose that. And then you do get into these conversations where you think something's just cool or fun, or we want to try something out. But there's not necessarily any purpose behind it.
Yeah. And if you go if you know that from the outset, it's just a different conversation versus, like you said, we've all lost the plot sometimes, where through like revision 45, it's like, what is this? What are we doing here? Yeah, I've had that experience more times than I can count. So if you're not the person bringing everybody back to reality, it's great to have colleagues who are. Those are great people to have on your team.
Yeah. So speaking of kind of having those conversations and bringing things back to your reality, and also asking great questions to make sure that you're getting the information that you need, what are some other ways that we can make sure that as marketers we convey the right messages to stakeholders, so we get taken seriously and we get what we need, I guess?
Yeah. And I by no means am perfect at this, but some things that I've learned, especially, as my career has progressed, and I'm not just, pitching things to my boss, but also like other executives or even like board members, people who are not in the day-to-day context and seeing everything I'm seeing every day. And one of the lessons I've learned is, how do you communicate things to someone who's coming to you in back-to-back meetings? They have 30 minutes. They don't have time to read your 17-page document. Like, how do you give them the context they need and give them the headlines? Like, you want to have this balance between, I did the work, it's all there if you do want to read that 17-page document, but here are the 3 things you as the CEO, the CFO, the head of product need to know. And here's what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation. I think that can make conversations go much more smoothly, versus assuming that they're holding in their head everything you're holding in your head, because they're not. Like, they have 17 other jobs that they're doing as well. And that's been really helpful. So it's not even like the content, it's just how you communicate it to super busy people.
Yeah. What about the layer down? So I think some of the problems with, people talk about sales and marketing alignment, or, marketing being allowed to have access to your customers, all those sorts of things, all those standard problems that marketing have. Do you have any sort of suggestions on how marketing should be kind of communicating with the wider business?
I mean, I think it's always good to explain like the problems you're going to solve. Like, hey, we want to talk to the customers because we want to figure out what issues they're having that we could solve with content versus taking up your time if you're a customer success manager or customer advocate. Like, I know people in those roles are going to be like, you're going to save me time, you're going to save me a meeting. Like, great. Here's how we can set you up for success. So I think just explaining, help me help you. Like, here is how I think I can help the business and impact your piece of the business in particular. A great example is if you're in a product marketing, or you interface with the product and engineering teams of a tech company. Not just barreling in and saying the copy in the product is wrong and I'm going to rewrite it, it's not clear enough, and instead being like, I think there's an opportunity to bring this copy in line with our marketing materials so that the onboarding is really smooth, and people you're going to have higher product adoption for this thing you've been focused on for like 3 months. Like, I have some ideas, let me run it by you live. So often in remote work, I'm curious if this is your experience, everything is like a comment in a Google Doc or a message in Slack. It's like, just get on a call with somebody. Like, that makes such a huge difference in how you're showing up, the relationships you're building, and there's much less room for misinterpretation and stepping on people's toes if you can just talk about it.
Yeah. Also, I think, talking about that experience of being remote and building relationships with people, I think that is one of the things that people don't do, is actually try and sort of almost sort of forget that the other receiving end, unless it's your immediate team, is another human being who's having a completely different day to you. Ruta and I recorded another podcast earlier on, and I started off by saying I was having a bit of an existential crisis. But the reason for that is actually because of a chain of Slack messages where someone's just bombarding me with information, hasn't even asked me how I am. And I know that sounds very petulant, but I'm a bit like, if you're going to ask me to do all this stuff, the very least you can do is say, hi, Emma, how's your day? So I think, that goes a long way. And I think we kind of forget about that in a remote setting, don't we? I don't know, like, if you guys have the same. I just sort of feel like, in the same way that if you're giving feedback or asking for feedback, or, commenting on someone's work, I think there is an aspect where you do need to remember that there is someone else on the receiving end of it. And it's okay to either have a call or be kind.
It can all become very transactional, right? Like,
yeah,
this is to be done, this is the thing, this is la 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 la. And yeah, it does. I don't deal well with that. Like, I don't even like people telling me what to do. So like, if you're not even going to like preface it with, hey, could you help me out with blah blah, like, I'm struggling, or like, could you have a look at this, like, that's totally fine. But if you're like, oh, this needs to be done, I'm just like, whoa, like, when did I sign up to this?
Yeah. And like, I am the most introverted person. Like, at the end of a party, I'm like flat on the floor, like no one can talk to me for, a weekend. That was my like one social excursion. So it's not that I'm advocating for like, everyone needs to have those remote happy hours that are like so painful and you're on Zoom, and like, nobody wants that. I don't think anybody wants that. But yeah, at my most introverted self, I would still rather have a 2-minute huddle with somebody on Slack. Shout out to the Slack huddle, my favorite tool in the universe. I would much rather do that, save everybody some time, save everybody some heartbreak, and just be like, hey, Kyle, like, there's this really urgent thing that came up. Here's what we're hoping to get out of it. I think you would be awesome at it. And like, we can check in at these times. Like, are you up for it? Like, they're going to say yes because it's their job, but it softens everything. And of course, you get to the point where maybe you can be shorter or more direct with people, but of course, going in, you need to like build those relationships. And I think people have gotten so used to like adding notes in like a Monday board or a Jira that they do forget it's a relationship. You have to put the work in.
Yeah, I mean, we spend more time at work than we do anywhere else. So the relationships you have with your colleagues make a massive difference to your well-being outside of your 9 to 5. So yeah, just framing stuff in a way like that is really, really useful. I think something that I like to do, I will check someone's diary. Like if I've got access to, let's say I want to talk to the CEO and I see the CEO has got back-to-back calls in their diary. If I go to that person and I acknowledge the fact that, look, I'm like, hi, I can see you're super busy. I can see you've got loads of calls. Something's come up. This is the thing. I know we probably haven't got time to talk about it today, but can I catch you first thing tomorrow morning or whatever? Like, just acknowledge the fact that person's having a really busy day. Like, again, just humanizing the request so that you are kind of making yourself known that it's urgent.
I think that's a great point too, that it's the CEO. Like, there's so much about like peer relationships, or obviously if you're a manager, you want to have a good relationship and like treat your employees, with respect and dignity and empathy, but you also want to manage up in that way. Like they're people too. And I think, we've all seen kind of the corporate TikToks about like the company doesn't care about you and like ridiculous bad behavior from companies. And I'm not excusing that at all, but like every person at the company, even the leader, is a person. And if you want to get ahead, like you build that relationship and you manage up and think about their calendar and think about how to frame things. And it's a skill set. Again, I'm not perfect at it. And I definitely did not have it when I first started out. I was just bumbling around, booking meetings.
Yeah. Oh my God. The booking the meetings without an agenda for the CEO, or putting something in their diary that just says catch up, that doesn't tell them what it is. And then you get there and they're like, what the hell is this? And you're like, ooh.
Same way the other way around, just sticking meetings in my diary when you haven't discussed needing a meeting with me. I'm not happening.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, just like give people a heads up. Like I have some, I don't even know what it is. I'm an elder millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, right? And I've gotten feedback that like, hey, when you put a meeting on my calendar, it's just like check in, I think I'm getting fired. And I'm like, oh, okay. like I'm happy to send you a Slack message and be like, hey, this is just about this. Like, don't stress, and that wouldn't necessarily occur to me, but I'm glad they said something because that's easy for me to do. It's not like a pain in the butt just to be like, you're not getting fired in this meeting. Don't stress out.
I had secondary stress over somebody that I manage having a diary invite like that from the COO. I was like, whoa, what is this? It was like blah 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 blah, what job check-in, and I was like, what is going on here? It was all good. Turns out the person getting the diary invite was the person who asked for it, so it was all good. But yeah, I had secondary stress from that. We're on how do I put this? We're both talking about being really professional and mindful and kind of empathetic towards other people, right, that you work with. But also we're kind of saying maybe you do strip back a little bit of yourself and your personality, especially whilst you're developing those relationships. How do we blend that? How can we ensure that we're still ourselves and we're not just coming to work as this, I don't know, corporate Ruta or corporate Emma, corporate Jane, but we're still communicating and we're still professional and we're still kind of getting the right stuff done?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like candidly, I don't mind being corporate Jane. You know what I mean? Like it's a part of my life. It's not my whole identity, and I'm happy to show up in the way I need to. And to be honest, I kind of hate the saying "bring your whole self to work." Like you don't have to. Like I feel like that almost sets this expectation that sucks for that person, because it is a job, right? It's not going to blend seamlessly with your whole life. So again, like there's a balance for sure. You don't want to be miserable and feel like you're putting yourself in a box. And I recognize that it's a lot easier too for remote, like first, like I'm wearing sweatpants. I'm comfortable right now. Do you know what I mean? Like if I had to go into an office, there might be a little bit more of myself and what makes me comfortable that I'm leaving at the door. But I think just realize that unless you are disruptive, like to others around you, to the business, if you're not disruptive and if you are having a positive impact on the bottom line of the company, you're going to be able to be yourself. Like there's going to be leeway. So really focus on the impact you have and not being a jerk. And I think you'll find that you can, send a funny gift to a colleague or like start like a company like trivia game or something. Whatever makes you happy, your personality will come out. But it shouldn't be the number one goal you have at the company. Like you need to prove yourself first.
Yeah, proof is definitely in the pudding, isn't it? It's like you still, especially when you first start a new job, there is an element of needing to still prove yourself. I don't know what it's like in the US, but obviously in the UK, we have a probationary period. It's 3 to 6 months if you work in-house, and if you don't pass your probation, you don't keep your job, and that's kind of that. And that is the time where you do have to, it would be a bit weird though if you passed your probation, then all of a sudden you started acting completely different. You like to think you can maintain it. Yes, they've hired me. Now I can, do whatever. No, you don't want that. But I agree with you. That whole kind of like concept of bringing your entire self to work, I feel like you get, I don't know, maybe like 75% of Emma. And then there is a 25% of Emma that you're never going to get, because that's me as a human being who has a life outside of work, even if I spend a lot of my time working.
You might not want to as well, right? Like work could be a really great escape for you from hard shit that's going on in your life. And you don't want to bring that with you because you get to just log on and speak to your team and do your thing for 8 hours a day. And you might really enjoy that. And it's okay if you don't want to bring the rest of it.
Yeah. And, I've had experience where people have had really horrible things happen to them. And, as a manager, you check in, you obviously say, don't come to work. And I've had people say, I want to come to work. It's a great distraction. I want to focus on this thing, and give them space to do that. But I think that's a great example. I was once at a company, a small company. So people were very friendly and it was pretty casual, but we were invited to like a weekend away in a cabin with like a hot tub. And like myself and my spouse, I was like, I'm good. Like I spend 50 hours a week here. Like, I don't want to be in a swimsuit around people. I don't want to be potentially trapped in a snowy cabin. Like there is a limit for me in the social aspect of work that ends at a work happy hour after work from the office, and just the cabin in the woods is completely off the table.
There's a line. We don't want to cross
There's a line.
it.
Yeah.
I'm such a introverted extrovert. That sounds great to me. I'm like, yay, planned fun, excellent. I'm going to get my social in. I'm not going to have to worry about like, it being awkward or asking people to do stuff. I'm so down.
Oh my gosh. Better you than me. Me.
I'm really sorry, Jane. I'm those people.
It's great. It's great. And there's room for all. There's room for all.
You can be whatever you want, can't you? That's it. That's the point, right? Is that if you are good and you do your job and the output is as it should be, then you can afford to do that stuff. You can afford to be a bit more yourself, or a bit more play around with stuff a bit more, but you've got to make sure that the output's there, right?
Yeah. And if the company is truly cracking down on anything that makes you, can I swear? Can I swear here? Yes. It's a shit company. Like you don't want to be in that environment. And I'm not saying it's super easy, especially in the market right now, to like just go find another job, but essentially that is a problem that you don't have to solve and like at that company by like forcing them to accept you the way you are. Not every company is going to be the best fit, and that's okay, for both parties.
You learn, and the longer you work, the more you learn pretty quickly, don't you? Where you can be more yourself and where you can't, and who that maybe that work persona is at this company. And that's also okay, that if you need to have that work persona as a sort of safety net, that's also fine. I know a lot of people hate that. I'm gonna get all the
And who your work person is, right? Like everyone has usually somebody at work that they know that if they're having a rough day, they can be like, oh my fucking God, like I'm going to murder someone, and finding that person's important, which is, oh God, I assume it's quite hard over remote now, because you don't, those interactions are different.
I think there's signs you can find. You can be like, oh, like I see that reference you made, or like I see that face you made in a meeting. Like, I'm gonna slide into your DMs. And I think like having the outlets too. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids, and I could say, this is who I am. This is my life, and I'm gonna start posting pictures of my kids to the general channel at Slack. Or I could say there's a parents channel where like we're all free at any time to be like, look how cute my little angel is, right? And everyone's thumbing up and excited about it. You can find those outlets, and you don't have to just bring it all to work everywhere and have that be the primary way you show up in every conversation. It's almost like a false choice to be like, you have to bring your whole self to work everywhere, versus you're going to find those places to express yourself.
Absolutely.
And what makes you you. Yeah.
Hashtag know your audience. Wonderful. Is there anything that we should have asked you, Jane, that we didn't ask you about this topic?
One thing I would just say, and again, I am not some paragon of like sage advice who has it all figured out, but if you only focus in your first 3 months at a company in just building trust with people, you're going to have way more fun down the line, because you built that foundation. And if I could go back in time and tell myself that at various jobs I've worked on, I feel like I would have gotten to do cooler stuff faster, which is like what we all want to do. Like, it is vibes. Like I want the vibes.
we all want some vibes.
We all want the vibes.
We want people to just like let us do it. Don't we?
Yeah, you don't start at vibes. Just don't start at vibes.
Work your way up to vibes.
You'll get there. Work your way up. Yeah. And you know what? Maybe that is the lesson here too, is I think people might think as you grow in your career, you have to become more serious and more buttoned up. But I think you can have more freedom and like get away with more.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for joining us on Blame It on Marketing. For those wondering, blameitomonmarketing.com is ran on Mighty Network. So if you're wondering how we're doing all of that good stuff, that's who it is. Thank you for joining us. And Jane is on blameitomonmarketing.com. I've said blameitomonmarketing.com like 12 times now. So if you have any questions about this topic that are kind of more specific or personal, I'm sure she would answer if you ask her on there. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.